Hello, welcome to the Bring Your Worst show. I come to you every Wednesday and Sunday at 1:11 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Vegas time. You'll notice some new office hours for the show. I'm actually it's not quite summer hours, but I realize I got some cool stuff that's happening. You guys will hear about it very soon, and I want to give some space for that. It's also from the standpoint of this used to be a show I did every 3 times a week, and I did that for 2.5 years. So we got about 300 or so, 320 or so episodes happening. And at a certain point, you feel like you have enough content, and you want to go more into the quality versus the quantity. So thank you for being along with the ride. Come to you every Wednesday and Sunday at 1:11 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Vegas time. You subscribe for free. And I'm also author of the book, Career Remix, Get the Gig You Want based on the skills you got. Came out about a year ago. Feedback's been really good. I appreciate that, especially the love and support. I have a lot of independent books that I've done, some of them right behind my big head on this side. Everything's mirrored, so forgive me. But on this side, I got some of my books. Some of y'all made those a bestseller. There's also one of those books where I actually worked with a publisher, part of Barnes & Noble, called Union Square and Company. Shout out to them. It's been a wild and interesting ride working with them, and thank you for the support over the past year. The book is available. Also got some new stuff coming soon, but you got to stay tuned for that one. And my main thing is help you as a side hustler, a solopreneur, otherwise a non-traditional entrepreneur. I was primary caregiver of my 2 kids, particularly my first one, when I started as an entrepreneur. And my wife had a traditional job, and I'm actually was handling things with the baby, and then later on babies. I was able to have 2 startups. The second one called Cuddler got pretty successful. We ended up selling it, my co-founders and I, and really trying to help all of y'all on that particular journey, which, particularly that was before the pandemic. Our first kid is about to turn 10. You know what I mean? So it was a while ago. You see the gray hairs, mostly from that period of time. But now we're into an era where we're working from home. We're doing a lot of dynamic things. So my job is to support you as a business coach, which you can learn more at damonbrown.net. Help you as, obviously, the producer and creator of this TV show, as an author, and any way that I can, keynoter, which I'll be doing some keynotes later on this year, and really supporting y'all on your particular journey, because now a lot more of us are on that work from home, kids coming in on the Zoom calls, you're caretaking this and that, and you're trying to make sure your health is straight. We're all on that similar journey, and I love supporting y'all. So there's a live Q&A that we do every single Wednesday. If we're not doing a live Q&A on Wednesday, it's actually a recorded live Q&A, if that makes sense. A rerun, as I had to explain to my kids, because they don't know what a rerun is, because we're in a new generation. But sometimes there'll be an encore of the lives. You guys can jump in. There's actually a live, so you're watching it live on May 31st. And you can hop into the Q&A if you have any questions about our topic today, which is live Q&A. As I mentioned, best books of 2023 so far. If you have my newsletter over at joindamon.me, it's free. Been doing that for several years. Comes out every Wednesday morning. And if you caught my newsletter this morning, my energy is kind of changing, just because the seasons are changing. Our boys got out of school. The school year ends early here in Vegas because it's almost 100 degrees already. So school year just ended a few days ago, and right before Memorial Day here in the States. I've done 8 books within the last 6 years, and there's a lot of things like that where just past 300 episodes of this show, which I've been doing 3 times a week, not to mention the shorts that you can catch on the channel. And there's certain points where you have to know what season you're in, right? And not just the physical season, because again, up here in the Northern Hemisphere, it's summertime, so it's starting to get warm, but also the season where you are life-wise, and that's going to impact where you are career-wise, right? I'm at this point where I've done so much work. Productivity, that's probably the word I'm looking for. I've been so productive. And our youngest son just turned 7. So basically, since he was born, I've been doing like at least one book a year. Again, I'm at 8, maybe 9 books at this point since he was born. So over the past 7 years, excuse me. And there's a certain point where you actually need to have life experiences, where you need to sit back, where you need to reap what you've sown. Usually that's put in a negative connotation, but that's not the case that I'm talking about. More like there's a certain point where you have to work with what you've created, or to assess what you've created and to take that in. And so this is like a really interesting time for reflection for me. This whole year has been so far, and we're about halfway through the year as I'm recording this, or as I'm live with you. And it feels like that time where I'm absorbing a lot more. So I'm not going to pan to my desk, but there's about 10 books over here. A few of them I'm going to mention today, but there's other books, and I'm just like a machine right now. I'm taking my time, having more quiet time. I had a quiet Memorial Day, so it was more reading and reflection, and catching up on news, and even a little bit of pop culture stuff, like a couple movies, just like absorbing. And as I talk to my coaching clients about, as well as I talk about this quite a bit in again, a new book, Career Remix. You have to know what season you're in, and then you can maximize that season. So I'm not in the startup season. I was doing my startups again when my first kid was born, like 9-10 years ago. I'm not in the let's do a whole bunch of books so I can help y'all get to the next level, and there's a lot I have to say season. I'm like, you can't do much more than 2 books a year, and have them be of substance. Then there's the season of I'm taking it all in, and what has the journey been like so far, and so forth. The reason why I'm kind of giving this preamble is that I'm not always an avid book reader. Like, I love reading books, probably more than the average person. I write books. I've written 26. So, I enjoy the craft of books. That's what got me into books, was reading them. That's what turned me into an author. But my point is that there's seasons where I read a lot more, where I'm a lot more voracious. And now, right now, my kids are out of school now until obviously the school year begins in late summer. There's all these different things that have happened, and the books that I've done, the keynotes that I've done, building up the show and so forth. And now it's summertime, and the office hours are shifting a little bit, and a lot of my clients, coaching and otherwise, are starting to take a little bit of time off, at least here in the States. And there's a little bit of space there. And so I want you to encourage you, whether you get into the books that I'm recommending, if you get into them right now, if it's summertime where you're at, or you have your season, preferably and literally later on. It might be wintertime where it's the holidays here in the States, and then everybody chills out, and then you want to pull out these books. I just want to kind of put a, no pun intended, but put a bookmark in this to recommend these 3 books that are fantastic. I actually have a personal connection to each of them, and I'm happy to break those down. But objectively, these are fantastic books. They're going to help you think in different ways. One of them is going to help you think about your career and your impact. One of them is going to make you think about your life. And one of them is going to make you think about how you integrate all those things together. And I'm super proud of the work that all 3 of these people are doing. If you want to go deeper into more book recommendations, a good aperitif for after drink, nightcap. That's the word I'm looking for. You tell I haven't been out that much. This pandemic's got me at home like a mug. If you want a nightcap after this, be sure and do the best emotional intelligence books out now. This is actually was from last year. I talk about all the books that talk about emotional intelligence. Brene Brown's on there, a few other folks on there, even the godfather of modern emotional intelligence, or EQ, which will be Daniel Goleman. I talk about his work as well as videos that support that. All right, so enough babbling. I just want to give some context to this. Let's get into it. First book is what looks like Bravery by Laurel Braitman, or should I say Dr. Laurel Braitman. Fantastic book. I just read it over the past couple of weeks, but I actually got a chance to connect with her at the latest TED conference. Shout out to Laurel. Her and I actually go way back. I met her at my first TED conference probably about a dozen years ago when she was a TED fellow. And she did a previous book, see how many octopus arms I can do, called Animal Madness. So she actually, I'm not sure if that's what her PhD is in, but she has a high level degree quite literally, not a degree, but maybe like a certificate in understanding the neurosis of animals. Fantastic, fantastic book, and then being a bestseller and so forth. This came out several years ago. This joint, though, is different. It's different. And again, I personally know Laurel. So in reading it, it was intense to know her and then also to know the journey that she's been on, how she's able to capture those emotions. It is a memoir. It is also about figuring out your identity and how that ties into your career, which if y'all know my work, that's highly tied to it. There's not a book that I've written out of the, particularly with the business books over, again, the past 7 years, the 8 that I've written, that doesn't have a personal element to it. She kind of took this and put it on its head where it's like, no, actually, I'm going to talk about my own journey. The most potent part about this book is how she actually talks about grief and how we run away from it. That is completely natural. It's completely normal. Yeah, I've had some really painful stuff happen in my life, so I get it. But how that grief during, in her case, childhood, informed the rest of her thinking, and ended up giving a framework that, whether true or false, that framework rang true to her until towards the end of the book, which her and I are close to the same age, shows she was well into her adulthood. She realized, wait a second, this framework that's been propelling me forward in my career, in my personal relationships, all these things, this framework or the root of that framework actually isn't true. And how grief can kind of push us in different directions. And in some cases, actually help us find ourselves. So it's almost like I have my Jungian, complete youngin. Youngin. Now I sound Southern. Not youngin. Jung, as in Carl Jung. The Jungian book back here that's called The Complete Jung. I'll try to find it somewhere on my bookshelf. But he's, of course, the classic sociologist. But that was beginning or the origin, arguably, of the theoretical practice of the hero's journey, which was solidified by Joseph Campbell. This is her hero's journey. And I would highly recommend this book because the level of skillfulness she has as a writer, and it's coming from a fellow writer, as well as the vulnerability and the intimacy that's expressed in the book. Again, as a fellow author, this is hard to do. And if you want people to relate to what you're doing, whether you're writing, which is an obvious example, but you're an actor, what have you, the more personal you get with it, the more people can relate to it. And sometimes as a coach, I run into this, particularly with the creatives that I work with, where they'll try to make something that's universal to everyone. And so it'll be a bland thing. And they're trying, but they're trying to make sure that everyone understands it. This is, again, I know her, so this is so specific to her. This is her journey. And with the specificity, even so many things in the book I cannot directly relate to, it's so intimate and so intense and so well described. I can be like, wait a second, I know the equivalent of that. She talks about growing up on an avocado farm in California and the way that she describes certain things. And I'm like, wait, that reminds me of me being able to taste the salt in the air when I was in Atlantic City, which is where I was born. But she'll describe like avocado trees and all these other things that I won't get into, but it's fascinating stuff. I can't relate to that life, but I can relate to the equivalent of that, me, starting my life on the East Coast, on the water. Those little details, those granular details, make it a lot easier to relate to what's going on when she's able to parallel back to losing her home or other challenges that have happened along the way. So sometimes we actually have to get deeper and specific with what our particular journey is and describe it in a way, and then other people can understand. In my own book, my bestseller, The Bite-Sized Entrepreneur, I talked about getting up at 3:15 a.m. and working from 3:15 a.m. to 6 a.m. because my wife and I's first kid would wake up at 6 a.m. on the dot for the first 2-3 years of his life. And so I knew that I had that 2 hours, 45 minutes to do my 2 startups. And that's how I was able to build the second one, which was particularly successful, at least in mainstream terms. Not a lot of people can relate to that, but maybe you have an older parent or a relative that's dependent on you. Maybe you have a day job. And so I didn't have a day job per se because I've always owned my own businesses. But the way I described it, you might be able to relate to it. She does this masterfully in it, particularly if you're processing grief or dealing with letting someone or something go. If you're familiar with the show, you know I talk about this a lot with, again, Brené Brown's work and other people's work, which I'll point to in a second. This should be on your shelf. She actually works with doctors now and helps them use writing to express their stresses and their challenges. I have doctors in the family. I'm married to a pediatrician, and there's so many different stresses that are unique to people that take care of other people. Now, you could be a caretaker, like taking care of kids. You could be a coach like I am. You could be a pediatrician like my wife. You could be in a position where, you're a nurse, what have you. And so now she works with a lot of people over at Stanford up in the Bay Area where, my wife and I used to live, and doing great work with that. So this is informed by that. So if you're trying to understand how to process your grief, not only is this book talking about her journey, or her talking about, it's written by her autobiographical journey about processing that grief, but it also deals with her informed thinking of helping other people process their grief. And my mother and I actually went to TED together a few months ago, and were able to sit in on one of our workshops. So then we were able even to workshop some of those challenging things. So it's not a matter of just saying, hey, I went through a tough time, this is my story, but also she's a practitioner of helping other people through grief. So if you're processing heavy stuff, I'm actually processing some heavy stuff right now. It comes up. This is an excellent book for your summer reading, right? Yep. You see what I mean? Right? So you're able to come through. She was able to come through the workshop as well. So thank you for chiming in. And I'm glad that Laurel appreciates you supporting the book. Something that's related to this that I did a couple years ago. Hard to believe because the show's been on that long. The show's going on 3 years. But I did this episode about 2 years ago about 3 ways to grieve a loss. At the time that I did this episode, I believe this is a live episode that I did. I'd actually lost a close mentor of mine named Jane Briggs Bunning. Rest in peace to her. She's basically the one that shepherded me into journalism when I was 14. Like, the definition of wet behind the ears, and showed me how nonfiction can be way more fascinating than fiction, because nonfiction is something that really happened. No shots at fiction. 2 of my closest friends are fiction writers, so fiction has a place. For me, I was into fiction, and then suddenly when I met Jane, it was like, oh, no, nonfiction is the thing. And I started interviewing people, and I got a scholarship, and that kind of got me along the way of the journalism career that got me to here. She had passed away about a year and a half ago, going on 2 years now. It must have been 2 years ago. And that was the episode where I talked about books that can help us grieve losses together. She did not pass away related to COVID. She actually was dealing with cancer. But it was also, if you go back to 2021, it was also a period of time where we had a year of this crap, where people were dying left and right. And even if you weren't personally affected, quote unquote, by it, you still saw it in the newspapers, you saw it in magazines, you saw it obviously in social media, online, and way things were handled and not handled, to be frank. And so it's always important to have those tools to be able to process your grief. And I think it's important to kind of make space in the show, because I usually keep the show pretty crisp. But I think it's important to keep to make space to talk about this, not only on the show but also in general, because as we're 3.5 years into the pandemic with COVID-19 and the related issues that we have, particularly here in the States, it's also too important to take a breath and to grieve and understand what was lost and what was not lost. So again, I just finished her book. It touched me personally. And with me talking about Jane a couple years ago, and when she passed away, this is an episode that I dedicated to her, where I talked about other books and tools that we can use to grieve. Because grieving, I forget how the quote goes, but grieving is the approximately, I'm going to screw up the quote or paraphrase it, but grieving is us still having love for something that isn't here. In other words, grief is still that piece of love for something that we cannot give the love to. These are tools in this video that will give some insight into that. So heavy stuff, but you know, life's like that sometimes. So you might as well get the good tools that you need. All right. The next book I recommend is Flavor+Us by Rahanna Bisseret Martinez. I hope you got your name right. I've never said that out loud. I've only read it. I love this book. I've really enjoyed it so far. I ended up getting a copy, and before I opened the envelope, put it on my, you know, I work at the dining room table sometimes. So on my side of the dining room table, I put the book out there, plan on cracking it open, all that good stuff, right? You see the cool, beautiful colors in the back. And then I went to do something, take the trash out. I don't know. I was gone for like 5 minutes. I came back and my eldest had already opened up the book, was starting to like smudge it and stuff. And I'm like, no, like you can have everything, but you gotta let daddy break open the book first. Come on. You gotta let me break it open. So he was already into it, and both my boys are really into cooking. So they dug this. This is actually the second release on 4Color Publishing. We'll get to that into a second because it's important to understand the context of this. This is Rahanna. You probably see her picture. She is both Latin American, or Latina, I should say, not Latin American. I don't know what I'm talking about. Latina. I know I put the A in there. Latina, as well as Haitian. And I believe she's also of other parts of the African diaspora. So she gets into that in the book. So you end up having this blend of cultures. My wife's actually Hindi. And so we have this blend of cultures literally in our family. And then for my side of the family, I have all different types of cultures that are happening there, from Puerto Rican culture to, excuse me, to, I know, it's a long list, a lot of cultures. And my roots are in New Orleans a couple generations back. So talk about a bouillabaisse, all kinds of stuff going on. What I love about this book, and making me excited to dive more into the recipes, is how the intro and how the recipes are little pieces of everything else. So in the intro, she talks about, sorry, I'm on top of the microphone. Let me put the book over here. I'm all muffled now. So in the book, she talks about going to a store. She's based over in Oakland. Shout out to the Bay Area again. And she talks about going to the store and asking someone, I think it was an older woman who had some interesting stuff in her cart, what she was doing. And she learned about it. And she ended up combining parts of Mexican heritage food with, it sounds like, part of Asian food, you know, because that's something related to dried shrimps. See, I'm putting the S on there. Dried shrimp. It's no S on there. So it's S on there when you're eating it, but not in regular language. If you're eating it, you can say shrimps. But dried shrimp, and it being this crazy combination, which I never would have thought of. And there's this blending of things, again, with her personally being of different diasporas, if you want to call it that. I could relate to that. My family can relate to that, which is probably why my son like grabbed it, and it was like a couple recipes he already wanted to do. Like there was one that jumped out at me, And of course, I'm blanking. You can tell I had a long weekend because suddenly my brain isn't working anymore. Let's see. So there was one. Here we go. Here we go. So now we're talking. Yeah, thanks for bearing with me. Creole mushroom hand pies. Now, you heard me just say that, you see the cups up there. Those are not duplicates. Those are actually from New Orleans, right? When I lived there. So I have some family history there. Not only me living there, but also my great grandmother was from New Orleans. So I'm familiar with quite a few of these recipes. I lived there for a year. Lived there the year going into Katrina, which was really intense. I talk about it in the salmon book you have behind me, Built From Now, if you want to learn more about my experiences down there and some of the intensity, particularly with Katrina, and what I learned about inequity and the power that we all have, even though we're often denied seeing that power. But I will digress. I've done entire books about it. I will relax. Check out Built From Now if you're more curious about the New Orleans experience. But I've never heard of this. It sounds like it didn't exist based on the description. It sounds like it's something that she built up. But you're talking about Creole, right? So again, we're talking about New Orleans with a general history. Mushroom, which aren't a whole lot of mushroom dishes that I can think of in New Orleans, right? Hand pies, which hand pies, then you're starting to get into, I'm thinking, the beef patty pies or the patties, which come from Jamaican culture. Shout out to my Jamaican friends that come from, they're called doubles, right? So the Jamaican culture there. You're talking about Haitian culture, which she says some of her family's from Haiti. Like all this different stuff, all blended in, but you're putting Creole in there and mushrooms, which aren't used that much in New Orleans food, right? If you go to New Orleans, good luck finding a lot of mushroom dishes, right? Not even fried mushrooms, because all the vegetables are fried. But but that's besides the point. The thing is that there's these interesting blends that work really well. And again, I can't wait to dig in with my family more on this. There was one particular thing, which is why I keep pulling it out, that I thought was notable. And what I love about what Rahanna does is she actually is almost like a guidebook, which cookbooks are guidebooks, but there's one area in here, where there's really simple graphic. There's quite a few of these breaking down the steps towards being more adventurous with your food and trying the different foods. So here's an interesting one. Do you have a wide and curious palate? Here are a few questions that will help you find out. Number 1, do you always want to try something new at a restaurant? Number 2, do you shop at stores that cater to clientele from numerous food cultures and regions? And I would add to that, that's probably a little bit more common in the Bay Area, perhaps in New York and so forth. I would also add to that question, do you ever shop at places that actually don't cater to the traditional cultures that you know, right? So there's, particularly here in Las Vegas, and then my wife grew up in Southern California. So when we go back to see her folks, then we'll see these different stores or different grocery stores that are geared specifically not just to, say, Japanese people, or not just to Eastern Asian, but it'll be a Japanese store, it'll be a Chinese store, it'll be a Thai store. And there's certain things you can only find there. Obviously, with my wife being Asian, of course you have the Indian stores, but then those Indian stores can be specific to the regions. So it's like, is it Hindi focused food, which is more vegetarian? Is it the more Southern food, because Hindi food tends to be a little bit more Northern, things of that nature, etc. So I digress. Number 3, have you ever seen an unfamiliar food on social media and wish to try it? Number 4, do you imagine substitute ingredients or extra spices for traditional recipes, which is what she just did, with Creole mushroom hand pie? And number 5, do people gawk at your school or office lunches? All right. I can relate to all these, including the lunches. Not so much at school, but definitely when I'm eating out or doing something. Because again, we have so many different cultures that are within the household that my wife and I created, as well as different cultures that are within my family. I keep thinking of when I used to live in Long Beach many, many years ago, and they're known for a crawfish festival. I don't know if they still have it. And being at the crawfish festival, and this is post Katrina. This is right after Hurricane Katrina. So I just came fresh from New Orleans, and I'm inhaling the crawfish, and everybody around me started getting really uncomfortable because the messiness required for these to eat these shrimp-like things where you twist the tail and suck the head, which is actual T-shirts you can get in New Orleans and say that. That made some folks uncomfortable, and it's like, no, this is how you do it. You're just not used to it here. I know that vibe. What she's basically saying is, number one, if you answered yes to any of these things, you might be more adventurous than you think, which I think is a key component of it. Just like with my coaching, you might be closer to having an audience with what you want to do. You might be closer to being an entrepreneur. You might be closer to even starting a side hustle and making it profitable. You might be closer than you think based on the discussions that we have, and maybe even some of the stuff you find in my books or on this TV show. And so trying to help us, again, Flavor+Us. So it's not saying learn about my flavor. She's basically saying, no, we all have different spices, different ideas. And how about we go and expose each other to all the different things that are happening? Now, another reason why this book is super important is that it's the second book on the 4-color book imprint, ran by Bryant Terry, who's actually an old friend and colleague of mine, who's a award-winning chef. I think he won a couple of James Beard Awards, which sounds flippant, right? But he won at least one. He's been killing out there. Again, based in the Bay Area, over in Oakland. And a handful of years ago, I want to say right when the pandemic began, he started working with 10-Speed Press and has his own imprint called 4-Color Press. And their first book was Black Food. And I was fortunate enough to be asked to write an essay for it. This book came out a couple of years ago. It's actually won some awards. My essay was about Black male vulnerability. And he comes from food community. He's a master of the culinary arts, but he's also very conscious as far as what work we're doing and how, just like I look at business and pop culture and even technology as far as being reflective of society at large, he does the same thing with food. And it's not just a matter of like, I'm going to make food because it tastes good. It's like this actually reflects all of our cultures. I could go on a rant, and I've written essays about how food reflects the different cultures that we have. But the point is that his publishing line is focused on diversifying the discussion and not saying this food is better than the other one, but finding a blend. Again, Flavor+Us. So shout out to Rahanna. I believe it's your first book. So, welcome to the author's circle. There's nothing like that. I hope you're enjoying your book tour or whatever the equivalent is. I think the book just came out a couple weeks ago, but you guys can grab it right now. I had a recent conversation, actually not recent. What am I talking about? A year ago, I had a conversation with Dory Clark. Shout out to Dory. She's author of several best-selling books, most recently The Long Game. And she's a fellow coach and just been killing it for a while. She's over in Miami now, I believe, so down in Florida, but she hails from Boston. We had a conversation about Career Remix, again, my new book that came out. And we talked about, let me make sure I get this right, maximizing your skills for your career. And this ties into all of this because for Rahanna, for Bryant, again, who comes from a traditional culinary background, even for myself, what you do, number one, should ideally be reflective of you and your intention, your particular POV in the world. The more you're able to embrace that POV, again, like I talked about even with Laurel's book, the more you're able to embrace that POV, the easier it is for other people to see what you're doing, to see the signal that you're sending out. Shout out to, excuse me, Nilofer Merchant. Sorry, I was trying to think if her book was up here. Shout out to Nilofer Merchant, all kinds of shout outs. Nilofer Merchant, The Power of Holiness. Nilofer, I hope you're doing great with your coaching. But she talks about signaling. And if you're not representing who you are, then other people aren't going to know that you're of the same tribe, of the same vibe. You don't have the same viewpoint, but people recognize you as a kin. The more you're able to do that, the more of an impact you're able to make on the world, because people be able to see you as being who you are, and they'll feel prouder about them being themselves. And therefore, you being yourself has a indirect, if not direct, impact on other people showing up as their full selves too, and making their proper impact on the world. We talk about that in the show and a few other things. Shout out to Dory. And Dory actually just had a conversation with the gentleman I'm about to mention next. And that is Mr. Seth Godin. If you've been following my work, if you've read my books, whatever, you know I'm a big fan of Seth. Actually worked with him when he did the marketing seminar right when the pandemic began. Ended up changing my philosophy as far as work I was doing. Definitely was foundational change. Ended up leading to the book Build From Now, which is one of my most important books. But some of the energy from that book came from me being in the seminar. His new book, which is out, I think literally today, either literally today or literally yesterday. I can't remember when books come out now, because they're kind of like music releases. They come out whenever. Let's say it came out today. It's out today. Song of Significance. I read it. It's fantastic. It's short, just like all of Seth Godin's book. Again, I consider him a mentor, so I'm following his lead. You'll find a lot of my books are short, as you can tell from over there. Here's what the Song of Significance is about. We're only going to be here for a certain amount of time. And if we're not going to make a particular impact with that time, thank you, right? So, good book. If we're not going to make an impact with that time, then in a sense, we're wasting that time. And the Song of Significance is basically saying, if you're an individual that's trying to make an impact on a greater scale, then it's important you find out how you can make an impact based on what you have the power to do. Not what someone else is telling you not to do, but what's within your realm. He talks about, in fact, one of my favorite passages early on is he talks about agency and dignity. Agency gives us control over our time and encourages us to choose what our contributions look like. Because it demands responsibility and some authority, agency is antithetical, I cannot talk today, antithetical to controlled industrial piecework. In other words, if you're, there's a classic example, and some of y'all watching can relate to this. If you are calling customer service and say it's an airline or, what have you, and both you and the customer service person know that they handle things poorly, the person on the phone, the customer service agent, might not have the agency to actually help you. They might be able to say, I'm sorry, but I know some of those scripts that the customer service folks say, they're not allowed to say, I'm sorry, because they're afraid it might lead to a lawsuit. So their hands are tied. Not to mention just giving you a replacement, whatever, or giving you frequent flyer points, whatever. I've been in those situations so many times. That's agency. The other part is dignity, and they're connected. Dignity flows from agency, allowing us to be treated as humans, not cogs, to be respected for our work and treated with as much kindness as the situation allows. So it ends up being like a bifurcated situation. The first level of it is that as an individual, which I tend to work with individuals, as an individual, it's up to us to take as much agency and to expect, if not demand, as much dignity as possible within the context of the situation that we're in. Excuse me. That means it might be a situation where you're at your organization and there's a committee, like a volunteer team or whatever, that's going to help improve work conditions. You might not be paid for that. It might not be compensation as far as dollars. But if that's an opportunity to impact the agency and perhaps even the dignity of other people on staff that might support them well after you go to the next job, then perhaps it's worth doing that. I'm not saying your time shouldn't be compensated. What I'm saying is that you have to decide if you're comfortable being in a cog or if you're comfortable doing that extra level of work to help support the situation. The challenge here, of course, is that there's a certain box that you're going to be in. If you're a leader, then you have the opportunity to add more agency and more dignity, but it requires taking a risk. And maybe the finances take a hit. Maybe it's like a Zappos situation where the customer service or what have you ends up being on the phone longer. And then, so that's less money that you're going to be getting in. A lot of this comes back to money. It might be you taking heat from the shareholders. If you're having a public company and it's like, or the not shareholders, or the board, if it ends up being a public company, it's like, what exactly is my point here, right? What exactly am I doing? Oh, I'm trying to go ahead and make sure that the customers are good. All right, well, if the point is to make sure the customers are good, then the customers are going to eventually come back or at least support what I'm trying to do. And in the long term, back to Dory Clark with the long game, and the long game, or the infinite game, as Simon Sinek talks about, I'm able to create a lot more substance, a lot more time, a lot more relationships over time than I would if I'm trying to get the quick buck. This is one of the many gems that Seth talks about in here. If you're familiar with this podcast, Akimbo, you know the vibes, you already know the energy of it. One of my colleagues, got a chance to interview Seth. In fact, quite a few of my colleagues. There's just one of them. But one of my colleagues got a chance to interview Seth a couple of days ago. It was a fantastic conversation. The link is right there, and you'll see me chiming in a couple of times too in the comments. But it's a fantastic conversation about why this matters so much. And specifically in this conversation, it's on the Hustle and Grace podcast from Hillary Sutton. One of the things that I love about this conversation is that Seth actually puts a number on the time we spent at work. I might be wrong, but I could have swore he said 90,000 hours. So if you think about that, let's just run with that for a second. I started working when I was like 11 or 12. I was a paper boy. But maybe for the average person, it's like 14 or 15, you work at the local pizza place, or whatever the equivalent is now, up until our retirement. 90,000 hours. It might be less, but it's definitely 5 figures. How are you going to spend those 90,000 hours? It's almost like those commercials where they talk about, oh, you spend a third of your life sleep, which 8 hours a day, technically, right? But it's like, so shouldn't you care about the mattress that you're on? It's the same argument. 8 hours sleeping and, a full-time job here in the States is 40 hours a week, which is 8 hours per 5-day work week. How are you going to spend that time? If you're an employee, if you're an employee, you have ways that you can make an impact, even that they might be small. He actually talks about that a little bit in this conversation. If you are a leader and or a manager and or the creator of a company and you're employing people, you definitely have the space to do that if you're willing to take a risk and trust the customer will actually appreciate that extra time. But that takes patience. If you're a founder like myself and you don't have any employees and you're just building stuff on your own, then you have to make a decision as far as what money am I willing to leave on the table now? What risk am I willing to take? What am I willing to put on the sidelines for right now to make sure I make a positive impact on the people that I said I did this business for? Otherwise, why do you have a business? Now, if it's to make buku bucks and then, retire on an island, then that's going to come across in the systems that you have and in the way that you treat your employees, as well as how you express things to your customers. And all that will trickle down. To paraphrase Richard Branson, I don't worry about taking care of my customers. I worry about taking care of my employees. And if I take care of my employees well, my employees will take care of my customers well. I don't agree 100% with that statement, but I understand where he's going. If you create the culture, which is what Seth Godin's all about, culture of generosity, and make sure that everyone's involved and hears that song of significance. What I'm doing is significant. I'm not a cog. The stuff that I do matters. If everyone hears that, that's going to be an amazing impact, could have an amazing impact on the people that you're actually serving. How could it not? Leaders create the environment for which employees can make a difference. Couldn't have said it better myself, right? If you want more insight into Seth's work, one of my favorite episodes that I've done, I did about a year and a half ago, is about what is a minimal viable audience. No, I'm not going to explain what it is here, but I will say it's the first step towards creating a product or a service or a business, even a culture that takes care of the customer first, and also will foster positive energy and encouragement within the business. So not just in your business as far as taking care of other people, but also the business within your business to make sure that you and other people that you employ or work with know that you're making a positive impact. If you're going to go deeper, man, I am tongue-tied today. If you're going to go deeper, be sure and check out the Bring It Worth Live from about a year ago, the best emotional intelligence books out now. And again, I am the author of Career Remix. Get the gig you want based on skills you got. All the links are below. If you're watching on Amazon, you'll see all the links on the side. Shout out to Laurel. Shout out to Rahanna. And definitely shout out to Seth. I appreciate all of you. And respect all of your work. And hope you guys have a good launch week this week. I know I've enjoyed reading all of your books, and I can't wait to hear from the rest of y'all as far as the books that you're enjoying this summer or later on this year. Until next time, remember that you can always bring your worth and you can always build for now. Take care.